Marty, this guy's collection looks more impressive than yours.
I know. This is what you call bottle envy, Justin. It's a thing whiskey collectors get.
That's just display. The table in front of me is probably about 70 bottles on it, and there's another to the side over here, another 60 or 80 bottles on it. Just some of the open stuff.
Yeah, it's always nice to have your collection.
We're talking about some of the other stuff, and we do have a bottle of Burke's in the 1880s sale. So
yeah,
I pulled out my bottle. This 1910s.
That's the old stuff. There's the stuff that's a bit older than that again that you're selling at the auction. Joe Hyman, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
Now, Joe is with Skinner's Auction House over in Boston, and they're auctioning off what's suspected, I have to say suspected, you'll fill us in a bit better than this, Joe, of being the oldest sealed bottle of whiskey in existence. I'm right there, aren't I, Joe?
Well, partly right.
Okay.
It's the oldest whiskey. The bottle itself is from around the 1860s.
Yeah.
Based on whatever evidence we've been able to uncover, the company Evans and Ragland, who bottled it, was only in existence after the Civil War, which ended in 1865.
Yeah.
So, based on the manufacture of the glass in that time period, we pretty much put the bottle in the 1840 to 1860s. So
okay.
They didn't really exist before the war, so it would have to be probably between 1865 and 1870.
For the bottle?
Right, for the bottle itself. The whiskey inside it apparently comes from much earlier. And that was the boast of one of the people that gifted it along the lines some 70 plus years ago, that it was from the Morgan collection, and it had predated the Civil War. So, it's a fine story in and of itself, but
it is.
How do you prove
J.P. Morgan? Like J.P. Morgan, the multimillionaire billionaire guy?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently we found evidence that he showed up in there was a famous collection in Baltimore, and he showed up somewhere around the turn of the century. They were apparently old money, going back to like the 1700s even, which is when this house was built, like in the 1780s or something. And so they were old money, and by the time he comes along, he's new money, and they basically blew their fortune, and he bought all their whiskey, and the only thing that was left was a few empties of this. According to an article that we found in the Baltimore Sun back 1976.
Yeah.
So we confirmed the Morgan connection. We tried to get the Morgan Library to find some more information about it, but their records were horrible, really. It was just wine, whiskey, Scotch, rum, Madeira, but no details about anything. Occasionally, there's a notation that we bought a collection from somebody or something like that. But there's very few details in their records.
Yeah.
So we can't get anything there. I mean, we're trying to get something that the house itself is in the National Historic Site. We're trying to get some of the archival information to try to ascertain, like when it was bottled, if they have any kind of notations or receipts or anything, tags, any kind of information about it. But this is what we got. It was bottled in the 1860s and purportedly pre Civil War whiskey, and so it's a fun story. And,
absolutely.
As we were following it, it does each step we confirm some of these stories that the family is telling about, because they've had the bottle for 60 something years themselves.
Now, it's been carbon dated. The whiskey's
Yeah,
been carbon.
so I said, well, there's going to be a lot of people that just think it's hogwash.
Yeah.
So if I can carefully take out a sample and send it for testing, would you let me do it? And he said, sure. I mean, he had no reason to believe that it wasn't real himself. And he's the third generation of this family that's been the caretaker of it. And he himself did research and found some information about Evans and Ragland at the University of Georgia. His uncle, who he got the bottle from, did his own research back in the 1970s with year-long correspondence with the mayor of LaGrange, Georgia, trying to find out what anything about this. But this is before the internet, where everything was digitized. So digging out information on something as obscure as a bottle of whiskey is like, who's really going to spend the time doing something like that unless you have something really significant? And now it's become significant. So so I think each step of the way they're trying to figure out what this thing is and where it came from. And it's I've said it's kind of like the red violin of whiskey bottles, because you have this family that's had it for 50 something years, and they got it from a guy named James Burns, who was a very close friend of the grandfather. He was a neighbor. They were very close friends, and Burns himself was just a historical figure in his own right. Just a handful of people in U.S. history who was at the upper echelons of government in every branch. He was in Congress and the Senate, and then he became a justice of the Supreme Court until we got into the war. So his good friend Frank Roosevelt needed him, so he resigned from the court, became director of war mobilization, and was basically attached to the hip to FDR for the rest of the war. Until FDR passed away, and then Truman made him Secretary of State. He then retired back to South Carolina to become governor for a term. So I mean, this guy is just like an amazing character in his own right. And he gifted the bottle to his pal and called it a conversation piece, if that's not an understatement. And then he spins the tale about it. We have the gift card that he gave with him, because the family basically revered this guy. It was like, let's say Winston Churchill gave somebody something over your way and said, and spun some story about it. And if the family was like that close to him, they'd do the same thing. They cherish this thing for the rest of their lives. And that's basically what they did. And Burns spun this story that J.P. Morgan Jr. showed up one day, gave him the bottle, gave one to FDR and another one to Truman. So I just figured the only time that the two of them would have been hanging out together would have been during the war itself. And every industrialist in America was working on the world war effort themselves. So it kind of makes sense. That's when it might have happened that he did this gift. And he was known for doing that, giving rare bottles to people and things like that. So he boasted that it came from his father's collection, and it predated the Civil War. Again, this is like a fun thing, and unless you can confirm anything, that's all it is some conjecture. But then we find this other newspaper article from like hundreds of miles away in a different time frame, confirming the Morgan connection, that he did buy this collection from somebody in Baltimore back around the turn of the century. Then we tested it, and it came back as this, crazy thing. And who knows where it came from? And I mean, you do see sometimes, even into the modern times, where the inventory was not very good in some of the distilleries in Scotland and Ireland, wherever.
No,
And a barrel pops up out of nowhere that like, oh, where did this come from? And then
absolutely.
when they go look into it, it's like, oh, this thing is 40 years old. It's 50 years old. Where did this come from? And then they bottle it up, and it's a great sensation. So
Yeah.
it's the right now. It's the only thing that I can think of is that it was probably stored in a demijohn somewhere and forgotten about, and then eventually after the war, people were scrambling to get whiskey to bottle it up, and in the post-war effort to revitalize the economies and whatnot, and they happened to get this demijohn filled with whiskey, and they just bottled it up.
Absolutely.
Exactly when it's from, who knows? Exactly
Who knows?
I don't know either, because nobody was distilling corn in Georgia in that time. They had to get corn elsewhere, so they weren't going to start distilling it. The local farm distilleries would have been distilling their own products, not getting other stuff. In fact, we found at the University of Georgia archives all these court documents about Evans and Ragland in the 1870s was suing the railroad for ruining their corn shipment. So the corn was coming from somewhere else. So most likely the whiskey was coming from somewhere else as well.
Yeah, so it could be Kentucky bourbon heading up over into.
Could be Kentucky, could be Indiana, could be anywhere.
Yeah, it could be anywhere. Now, the estimate of this bottle is between 20, was it 30 and 40,000?
20,000 and 40,000. I mean, initially we had a lower estimate on it. We raised the estimate based on the tests, but it is a bottle from Georgia. We don't know where it's from. So, how aggressive can somebody be in the estimates? All you're going to do is chase people away. And so, with conservative, we try to be conservative, especially in an unknown.
Yeah,
so
realistic.
20 to 40. Is it going to go past that? The way it's looking, it's probably will, because it's as we're talking now, it's at 32.5.
Yeah, I think Justin was bidding on it there. That's where the 32.5 come in.
Yeah, well, I hope he put up his there's a $20,000 good faith deposit required to bid on it.
Yes, it was Marty McCauley's name. Don't worry.
That'd be more like it.
I guess he got your credit card number or something.
That would be like him. It would be. Now, you've lots of other spirits. Now, Skinner's obviously are a massive auction house. They're a big auction house who cover art and ceramics and all the other paraphernalia of collectibles as such. Now, the world of spirits and especially whiskey is starting to move dramatically. I mean, prices are starting to soar. And how do you're obviously seeing that on the front line as such?
Yeah, it runs in peaks and valleys in a way, where we get a lull of like 6 months to a year. Sometimes every couple of years, it falls back a little bit and gets a little quiet. Then all of a sudden, something exciting happens, and it roars back to life and goes off in a whole new direction. And through the pandemic and everything, it's everything's taken off. And it's doubled or tripled in the past year.
Yeah. I mean, I think with interest rates sort of worldwide being so low, people are looking something tangible that they can, assets that they can buy to invest in. And whiskey seems to be flavor of the month.
Well, also it's a commodity too. So there's also the people are drinking them, so there's natural attrition as well. So you're getting a double effect of not just the natural investment value and the increase in value for rare items. You're also getting, some of them are coming out of the market because people drink them and then they no longer exist.
Yeah.
So the market might think there's an aggregate value for a particular bottling, But as soon as you start taking a few of those out of the mix, then it's that many fewer. So you automatically have an increase in value on a per bottle basis.
Yeah. It's there's also with the likes of whiskey, you've got so many aspects to the collecting of it. You know, from the bottle design to the location of the distilleries. You know, people collect Irish whiskies, they collect Scotch whiskies, Japanese. I'm sure in the States there's people who really just collect Kentucky bourbon. You know, old bottles of that. So there's all those different aspects that a lot of other collectibles might not just have the same thing. Plus the fact you can get drunk on it. You can have a bit of a party
Right.
with
Well,
them.
it's also a lot of people, myself included, things that I would particularly collect per se. I mean, 90 to 95% of my collection is primarily a drinking collection that eventually I plan on drinking them. You know, at this point, I hope I live long enough to drink all these bottles. But I know I collect like birth year stuff, and I know a lot of other people collect birth year stuff.
Yeah.
So you know, that's another aspect. And eventually at milestone birthdays, you pull out something that's from that year. And you know, I did that myself a few years ago, and I turned 50. I pulled out some 1966 bottles.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I noticed you've got a bottle of Willie Napier Irish whiskey, which was distilled in 1945. So, Justin, you could buy that for your birthday.
What I want to know is, have you ever come across anything with a provenance that you couldn't prove?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally things like that come up, and you know, people spin stories, and again, even with the Old Ingledew, there are details that you know get lost in the shuffle, and they exaggerate certain aspects, and eventually, you know, you can ascertain certain things about them. I had somebody a few years ago brought me a bottle of E.H. Taylor OFC that they claimed it's been in the family for 100 years, blah blah blah. It dates to the 1850s because it was 60 years old at the time they lived in a particular house. It's like this whole convoluted story.
Yeah.
And yeah. And the guy tells me, well, he contacted Buffalo Trace to see if they were interested in it, and they kindly told him to, you know, have a nice day. So I told the guy, you know, Taylor opened his first distillery in 1869. So to have a bottle from the 1850s is, you know, really impossible. And it's probably why they told you we're not interested. But I examined the bottle, and it appeared to me to be more like 1880s. And I did find on the label a quote by somebody who was the collector of revenue for the 7th District of Kentucky, and by the name of A.M. Swope.
Right.
So I searched the guy out, and I actually found him. He was the collector of taxes in the area from 1877 to 1884. So you know,
he's got,
eventually you can figure it out. I mean, but as far as like I've had people bring me bottles that I determined that really weren't authentic or couldn't be verified, and you know, those never see the light of day. They go back to the guy who brought them to me, and that's it. You know, hopefully he doesn't pass them on to somebody else. And most of the times he's been duped by somebody. You know, a couple of years ago, somebody sent me 3 bottles of Macallan to authenticate, and with the caveat that if I thought they were fake, I should just all together so nobody else would get screwed. And that's what we did. We took a video. It's on our website, and I went through each bottle, and you know, they were all 3 of them were fake. One was a label 30-year-old. A Grand Reserve of 79, and an anniversary malt 29-year-old, and the Grand Reserve Blue Label 30 were obvious fakes. The printing quality was terrible. The direction of the watermarks and the paper were in the wrong direction. There was like all kinds of things wrong with it. Oh, and one of the capsules was missing the N in Macallan altogether, and somebody drew it in with a pen.
Yeah.
And they carried through the fake labeling onto the boxes as well. So I mean, they were absolute fakes. The anniversary malt was a Macallan bottle, and it had a genuine capsule to it, but it was obvious. It was because of the length of the neck. It was obviously the 7-year-old that was bottled only for the Italian market.
Yeah.
It had an Italian tax strip on it. So somebody had swapped the label out and turned a $50 7-year-old Macallan into a $3,000 25-year-old Macallan. But so after we determined that they were all fake, we cracked them open. And I sampled them on camera. One of them tasted like a really bad cherry liqueur, almost like cough syrup. One tasted like a very harsh, bad blended Scotch, and the third one actually tasted like a nice whiskey. It was the 7-year-old Macallan. It certainly wasn't a 25-year-old.
No.
So we then poured them in a bucket, and I took a hammer and I smashed those bottles to pieces.
Now your auction that you have up and running, there's a whole range that runs from 17th century cognac or 18th century cognacs to but the Irish stuff's really what I want to sort of talk about a little bit. Now you've got a Jameson Royal Jubilee from 1935.
Right. I contacted Avery to see if they had any information about it, because I couldn't find anything myself, and it looked like it was a 1930 bottling. So I asked them, do you know anything about this Jubilee bottling? And they said, oh yeah, we did that like in 1990 or something like that. I'm like, no, this is like a much older bottle. And I sent them a photo of it, and they came back like, oh wow, we've never seen one of these. And the last time they did a Jubilee, I guess, was 1935. So that's how I put that down there. So at 37 years old, it's also late 1800s whiskey in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a fabulous thing to have. Now, in terms of whiskey prices, it seems to me extremely reasonably priced for the estimate. The estimate's probably, at $1,500 upper limit. That seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah, well, at least in the U.S. market, Irish whiskey hasn't really caught on in the collector's market as much as it has over by you guys. I think over by you guys, I think $3,000 to $4,000 would probably be more appropriate. But I don't know if our market over here can warrant something like that. I mean, I've had other rare bottles of Irish whiskey, and they just don't do the same thing the way Scotch does. And as much as the overall Irish whiskey market has exploded in the last few years,
absolutely,
the collectible side of things for the antique bottles really hasn't caught up yet.
Well, there was over the whole COVID time, a lot of the Middleton, the annual release Middleton bottles really, really shot up in value. We saw that, but we started to see them dropping back down again. I think these old bottles are massively underpriced because they are extremely rare. I mean, there's not very many 30-plus-year-old antique Irish whiskies about.
Well, you get 37-year-old there. The Willie Napier's 44 years old.
Yeah.
Bargains. I do have in my collection, hidden away somewhere, a miniature from Cadenheads of Jones Road, 48 years old, which is the oldest Irish whiskey I've ever seen myself.
40-year-old Irish whiskey is just I mean, there must be very low hundreds bottles of it in the entire world of all descriptions. I mean, there's just none of it about.
Yeah. Well,
So-
yeah. Some of the things that never came to the U.S. market were those the Napoleon Castle 1951, where they did several bottlings of that. And they were,
Mhm.
most of them weren't single barrels. Some of them were, but mostly they had blended the barrels together for the commercial aspects of it. But there were other vintages from the late 40s to early 50s that were in other age ranges.
Should someone from Ireland decide, and I'm thinking of Justin here, by the way, should Justin decide to buy, and let's be honest, the Old Ingledew is really what Justin would be after. That's the level Justin's at these days. If he did win the auction, is there a way of Skinner's shipping it to us? So can we organise that through your
Shipping is a difficult situation right now, especially since we're in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is cracking down on any companies trying to ship out of state altogether. And but there are ways. If somebody we can box it up. We've got a crate ready with padded. It's in a padded case as well. So if somebody wanted to come over and pick it up, it might be the safest thing to do is to come pick it up yourself and tote it back in your luggage.
Justin,
it'll be in a crate.
I have the private jet in standby. Yeah. Private jets in standby. Unfortunately, they wouldn't give you permission to land the Globe Star there because of the global pandemic. But there you go.
They're not letting us in. They won't let anybody in who's not a US citizen. We're kind of grounded. We can't get to you, but
we have one in standby just in case.
We've got the jet fueled up. Just whenever Justin lifts it, we're going.
Listen, I want to ask you a question, and this relates to in the UK and Ireland, especially in Scotland, dormant distilleries have been re-established. Is that a thing in the States? And if so, if a dormant distillery or a name comes back to life, does that increase the price of old whiskey, or does it drop the price of the old whiskey?
I think it increases it because you're going to have people that are that much more fascinated with it, and outside of the hardcore enthusiasts, things like Macallan and Madeira, like you had mentioned, that are being revived in Scotland as we speak. The prices on those things have been going up, even though they announced that they'll be going back online very soon. Some of the things over here would be like Michter's. Michter's has roared back to life. It's no longer in Pennsylvania, but it's in Kentucky instead of Pennsylvania. But it's roared back to life, and some of those bottlings are going through the roof too. We've got a 20-year-old Michter's single barrel that's up to $4,000 right now.
Yeah. Wow. Now, there's another couple of things that in the auction that caught me eye. I looked through the lots today. I mean, an old California brandy from 1910, and it's set in the estimate. Now, obviously, estimates, I know that it's not what it's going to find, but the estimate's $200. I mean, that seems ridiculously cheap.
But that's what those kinds of things go for, because it's a California brandy. It was probably made just to be as I think it says on the bottle as for family or medicinal use or something like that. So I mean, some of those things they're more novelties than anything else.
Yeah, but I mean, just for the sake of having something, I mean, California, let's be honest, was a very young state in 1910. And the fact that there's a brandy from that, I think is a collectible. In 10 years' time, somebody who buys that for $200 will think themselves they've got themselves a nice bargain.
I had one last year, I think, a similar bottle. It might have been even a very low fill level, much poorer condition than this one. It sold for like $150.
It does just seem very. I know condition for the collectors, condition. But if you're going to buy something at $150, that's of that historic, it's that historic and there's that bit of a story to it. It's a very tempting drink. So the guys who have got a nice pristine bottle of it, a good bottle of it, I think in 5-10 years time they'll be thinking, I made a nice investment there.
Maybe. I mean, that's why a lot of these things, when I get bulk stuff, I try to sell them in lots of 3 or 4, because it's kind of like the rule of 3, where somebody likes to drink one, save one, and display one. And if they've got a 4th one, then they've got trade bait as well. So I mean, and usually there's one that's in poorer condition than the others, and so they'll want to save and display the nicest one, and they'll drink the poorest one.
Yeah, exactly. And
I mean, I do that myself. So just I once upon a time, when I started doing the auctions from this side of things, somebody said to me, it was actually one of the car specialists said, you have to sell with a buyer's mindset. Yeah.
It's the same as any. You have to remember your head over your heart, because it's very easy to go just one more bid,
Yep. And you catch the fever and it's all over.
Yeah, and suddenly you've set a new precedent for a bottling.
Yeah, well, I tell people, they say, well, how much is it going to go for, and how much should I spend, and how much should I said, don't ask me.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're worried about it, just set a max bid and close the browser and forget about it. And if you win it, you win it, and if you don't, you don't. But if you're gonna start chasing things like that, and it's kind of like gambling. You get it in blood, and it's very hard to.
Yeah, it's
dangerous.
It is
really
dangerous.
It's like somebody with a credit card in a casino.
Yeah.
That's why they had to move the ATMs out of the casinos. People were doing that.
Yeah, but it's fun as well, and as long as people have fun doing it and getting your collection, popping the bottles every so often.
I've proposed to management to as a marketing ploy. Why go to casino? You're just going to lose your money. Why go to the racetrack? You're going to lose your money. Oh, election? Well, bid on something, and then you're going to get it, and you go home.
That's a good marketing ploy. Yeah, it is.
I like your thinking, Joe. I like your thinking.
Yeah.
And especially if you get a bottle of booze at the end of it, and you can all sit down and have a nice old bourbon or an old Californian brandy. Now, Joe.
Or an Irish whiskey from the 1880s.
Or an Irish whiskey from the 1880s. Now, you have your Napier, you have a 2 Jameson, you have a much more contemporary bottling. You have the 24-year-old Teeling,
right,
which was voted best single malt in the world, that bottling. And it's nice to see some of the new contemporary stuff appearing up against the old historic bottles, because it has its own story to tell.
Yeah, well, we also, from time to time, every auction is different. We don't always get something that's going to be, spectacular or unique or whatever. But we often get bottles of, like, say, Middleton's, very rare, or things like that. The old Jameson's bottles from like the 40s, 50s, 60s, they pop up more readily.
It's just nice to see Teeling being there along with the old guys, because in a lot of years' time, it'll be there in its own right, as something that people will be desirable and be sought after. Yep.
Again, especially after people drink up a bunch of them too, and there's not very many left.
Not very many left. That's it. And as long as people keep popping the corks, the people that are holding on to them, they're happy as well. They're spreading the love in a different way. Everybody in the room gets a drink. Everybody's happy. And some guy sitting on his little collection in Maryland, he's going, "Thank you very much, guys."
Later this year, an elderly couple that has been collecting whiskey for the last 20, 25 years, and they're approaching 80. themselves, and they don't want to leave it to the next generation to deal with.
Yeah.
So they're looking to cash in. Well, they're looking to get out. Cashing in is just a wonderful bonus.
Yeah.
Has the lockdown helped the online market? Because obviously, for a while there in the States, people weren't allowed to attend the auction in person. But obviously, with people being stuck at home, they've maybe got into auctions, which of course can be accessed online. Has that increased your business and awareness locally and globally?
I think that, again, there's like a double effect. You have people sitting at home and just looking at it, and it's affected auctions across the board, not just in whiskey. All auctions have suddenly like jumped the past year. Everybody's sitting home to do, and in many cases they're getting significant unemployment benefits because of lockdown and stimulus checks. What are they doing? They're spending it, and sometimes it's innocuous stuff, on elections and whatever, and then you also have the whole, alcohol business on the retail base has been booming because the bars were all closed and people needed their drinks to with the pandemic, and they're drinking up collections, drinking up whatever they can get their hands on, and they're trying to replenish their stocks too.
Yeah. It's a very interesting time in many ways, but the auctions are seemingly rare spirits and whiskies are just keep getting more valuable, more collectible, and it's a nice thing to be involved with. I thoroughly recommend people do it because it covers a lot of bases for a lot of people.
Well, it's also the mainstream auctions for whiskey is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. It's not until, let's say, the 1990s and into the early 2000s that the regular people could start getting into this stuff because the internet opens everything up for everybody.
Yeah,
and you've got the eBays of the world, and before the federal government here cracked down on eBay for selling whiskey online through their site, people were trading there. But it's just expanded, and you can see over there in Scotland and Germany and other places in Europe, even in Ireland, the proliferation of auction houses dealing specifically in whiskey has exploded.
Do you need a liquor license to auction whiskey there?
I know smaller auction houses will throw bottles in here and there, and I don't think the authorities are going to do anything about that. It's kind of like estate sales also. If somebody's selling their parents' stuff at a yard sale, estate sale, and there's some bottles of liquor, the state isn't going to come down and start harassing somebody over that. It's only if they start advertising through like an estate liquidator, and the liquidators, they're not going to risk their own business license to sell alcohol illegally, so they won't sell them. It's usually just somebody that's in their own yard sell, and there's a few rules or something. Nobody really cares about that. It's not like they're doing a business of it.
Yeah.
So once it gets in, it crosses that line. That's when the government starts to notice. Smaller auction houses will throw bottles in there as well, and again, it's as a collectible. Nobody cares that they're gonna. It's more a fine line in that regard. I suppose if they were doing it on a regular basis and large scale, then there would be an issue with whatever state they're in, and probably even the federal government. But by and large, to run any kind of wine or spirits auctions in the U.S., you really have to have some kind of retail license to work it through, because the only way to really distribute direct to the consumers is through a retailing license.
Yeah.
So we have a partner. We're not one of the huge auction houses out of New York that have their own wine shops attached or anything like that, their own retailing branches that we can, access their license. So we do have a business partner in that regard, and we basically piggyback their license to do this.
Yeah, that's what some of the auction houses do here. They've told us that.
Yeah,
But
there's some of the stuff. Now, Joe, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I will be keeping an eye on this auction. And who knows, I might steal Justin's credit card and buy something for Justin, as a nice present for Justin sometime.
Yeah, another little tidbit on doing research on these bottles, the Burks that we have in this sale.
Yeah,
I found the chemist's label on the back was a professor of hygiene and chemistry at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. And when I searched him out, and I found out that he was professor of hygiene from like 1875 to 1880, and then he became also professor of chemistry until 1885, when he made the vice provost of the college or some such thing, and he was no longer professor. So I kind of figured that it was the only time he was both professor of hygiene and chemistry was roughly 1880 to 1885.
Yeah, so that's when that bottle's coming from. It's just it's a fabulous bottle. Yeah, it's fabulous.
As long as it wasn't Burke of Burke and Hare, the Body Snatchers, you're all right.
Yeah, or that creepy shop on the Harry Potter movies, Bergen and Burke.
Exactly. Joe, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We will keep an eye out on the auction, and I'm really interested in the Inglewood. I want to see what it does, because I think it could do something nice. It's a lovely story to it. So we'll let you go, and we'll catch up with you again sometime soon.
History, that's for sure.
Yeah, this is it. It's got its own history. So thanks very much for talking to us, Joe, and all the best. We'll catch you soon.
Yep, my pleasure. Have a good one, guys.